Hello, everyone, and welcome to another recap series on my over the board classical tournaments. This time I'm going to cover the Ottawa Winter Open. Sorry for the delay of uploading the videos of this tournament. Right after that tournament, I went as a coach of University of Toronto to the Canadian University's Chess Championship, and there was a lot of other stuff in life that I had to deal with. A lot of positive stuff, of course. Um, but now I'm back and I want to cover this tournament that I recently played in January, which was in Ottawa. And in round one, I was facing a talented kid. His name was Zihan Hong. And I knew that he recently managed to beat or draw some strong and decent players. So I knew it's a pretty serious game in round one. Even though his rating is 1796 FIDE, he was like close to 2000 Canadian rating, and I knew he can be possibly a dangerous player. So the thing that I want to first explain about this game is that if you have watched my recaps from the previous tournaments, what you saw was that in most of my games, I started with a move e4. And this is like basically my main repertoire at this moment in time. But in this game specifically, I decided not to go for it. I had a really long think about which opening I want to choose as white. And the reason I didn't choose e4 was that he was playing Sicilian, and I actually said many times Sicilian is my favorite opening to face. But against Sicilian, I had three different options. One option was, of course, to play knight f3 and prepare some specific line in open Sicilian against his repertoire. But I didn't go for that because I had just like 40 minutes before the round to prepare after the pairings were out. The other option was to go with knight c3, my main repertoire that I usually do play against the low rated players. But I saw that he specifically plays this line with g6, and against my repertoire, the game will probably go with d4, cd4, queen d4, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, queen to a4. I'm preparing to go e5. And then he knew the best move d6, stopping e5. And I can go e5 anyways and put some pressure on this knight on c6. But black has this idea to go bishop g7, bishop b5, castles, sacrifice a pawn on c6, and then play bishop b7. And this position is slightly better for white, and I knew the ideas, of course, how white should play this position. It's not something that I usually mind facing. When in round one, I just didn't want a long grind with an extra pawn where my opponent has all the activity, and I need to like spend a lot of time, maybe like 10, 20 moves to slowly consolidate and then try to maneuver around. And it's always like in these sorts of games where there's a chance if you're not accurate enough, you might lose one pawn and then you're probably going to have to settle for a draw or have to grind out a long and equal endgame. Another option against e4, c5 was to go c3, the Alpine Sicilian, which I played in many games as well. And again, I saw against this line, he had this one game where he played this little bit of a dubious line where he takes on d4 and goes bishop g4. And against this line, there's this, again, long theoretical line where I go knight c3, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight b5, and the game just goes on and on. Like, he usually wins this rook on a1, I win the rook on a8, and white is slightly better. Like, I just want to show like one very long line that can possibly happen. Like, of course, there are a lot of ways the game can take. Like, let's say they developed. I try to get this knight out from a8, and they're probably gonna stop my bishop's range, like with knight f4 ideas. And what happens is that I usually go with a knight on a1. Of course, like knight c2 is met by rook c1. And everything basically gets traded. We get an opposite color bishop endgame where white is much more active, slight advantage, but it's going to be a long grind. Again, like, I don't want, against a player like this, I don't want to get into a situation where he blitzes out 20 moves of theory and we just get an endgame right off the bat. I want more fight. So I decided to start the game with d4. This is the first time, I think, in a recap series where I start the game with d4 in this game. He played d5, and I was even thinking to go some d4, c4 and try to get a position, like maybe some QGD, try to grind the Carlsbad structure, but I just came with a decision to play the London system. I had no idea what system is he going to choose, but I was like, I'm just going to play the London system and we will see what will happen. That was literally my preparation for this game. He played bishop f5. He chose the symmetrical line, which kind of made me a little bit annoyed because it's a pretty solid line. E3, E6, and here was another big moment that I had to make a decision over the board. So I know for a fact that the main try that white can go for if they want to play for the win is the move c4. And the idea is that if black goes c6, now after queen b3, white is kind of exploiting this bishop on f5 by putting pressure on this pawn on b7. So for instance, they go c6, I can go queen to b3, queen to b6, and then c5. And this is actually really good for white. Like after the queen trade, probably white can go b4, b5, and try to create more weaknesses on this side of the board. But the reason I didn't go for it is that black has this option of taking the knight on b1 and then throwing this check on b4. Obviously, I can't go knight d2 because of knight e4, winning the piece. So I have to go king e2. Now after d takes c4, I give this check on a4, I play knight e5, and this is a very theoretical line. It has been played by many top players, but I just didn't want to go for it because I had no idea how much theory my opponent is going to know. Like there's always this risk, especially with younger players, that they already have like the whole line memorized, and you're either going to get an equal endgame, or worse, if I don't know the line, I might get a worse or losing position. So I was like, I'm just going to play positional chess. Instead of going c4 and allowing all of that, I'm going to go knight b to d2. So now if he goes c5, I was planning to take on b8 and go bishop b5 check. Now I was like, with a king on e7 against a low-rated player, I feel like I have enough firepower to create chances. But he plays very solid. He plays bishop d6. Now I go knight e5. I'm avoiding trades. Like, as you can see, it's very important. When you face low-rated players, it's, I think, a very good idea not to go into long theoretical lines and try to keep pieces on the board. So he castles, and here was the first moment that I started to think. So with knight e5, I was also preparing to push g4 and h4 on the king side. So in the game, I played bishop e2 to prepare g4. But another move that I was considering was g4 right away, which is very interesting. So of course, this move is the best if it wasn't for bishop takes e5 intermezzo. But even here, I was thinking after d takes e5, I might have enough compensation. So first of all, if they take with a knight, I go rook g1, and now h3 is coming next. And with this rook open on the file, with bishop h6 ideas coming, and also this knight not having any place, black can possibly be in trouble. It turns out that there's only one way for black to equalize in this position, and that is queen h4, preparing knight h6, and also threatening mate on f2. Now after queen e2, now I'm threatening to go knight f3 and h3 and try to kick this knight. Now the only move for black to hold equality, you can pause the video and try to find it, is the move f6. Very important move. And the idea is that black needs to liberate this knight on g4. Now the point is, if I go knight f3 and then h3, they can always take on e5 with a knight, and they're not going to lose material. And it's funnily enough that in the game, I didn't refute this idea because of knight takes. I refuted it because of bishop takes, which is another option. And I saw that I can play f3, but then I was like, after knight h5, I will win a piece, but now he has queen h4 check. King e2, queen takes g4, knight f3, queen takes f4, and black gets 3 pawns for the piece. So I have a bishop for 3 pawns. Apparently after queen d4, white is much better, but I wasn't sure how to evaluate this position. And again, like, when you play a low-rated player, you don't want to get into situations where you have your king on e2. You don't want pure chaos. You want more controlled game. So I played bishop e2, preparing g4. And my opponent here made a mistake. He played knight to e4, which is the first step in the wrong direction in this game. So he should have realized that I want to start attacking on the king's side. Once he realizes that, he needs to counterattack in the center with the move c5. That's the best move. first things first, if I go g4 now, he can go bishop to e4, and if f3, now he can even take on d4. Now f takes c4 is well met by d3, and this knight on e5 is very shaky. I can't even take back with my bishop. So then I have to take back, and after bishop g6, looks like I can still have these h4 ideas to try and trap the bishop, and if they push, I take it. But the problem is h4 is actually a bad move, and after h5, I can't really take on g6 because then with the f file open and my king having no shelter, it's actually black who has more pressure in this position. So after c5, cd4 and d3 are actually huge threats. So the best I have is to take on c5 and then play g4. But again, if I want to go with the same idea, black has this very nice idea to play bishop to d6. So it looks like after h5, this bishop is getting trapped. But after bishop e4, f3, queen c7, again, this knight is very shaky on e5. If I take bishop e5, and the knight doesn't really have a good square. Like knight d3 gets taken by bishop takes d3, and black is more than fine here. Of course, seeing these lines is a little bit tough. So early in the game to find like all these ideas with queen c7, cd4, d3. And that's exactly what I want from playing this opening. I want my opponent to be under pressure from the get-go. I don't want my opponent to just show up, blitz out 20 moves of theory, and just get an endgame where he's just slightly worse, and I'm the one who needs to be very, very accurate, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble. Of course, by in trouble, I mean, risk of getting an undesirable draw with the white pieces against a lower-rated player. So he plays knight e4, and now I start going with g4. Bishop goes to g6, and now h4. And all of a sudden, he's in a little bit of a trouble. Look, it's h5 coming, so this bishop is almost getting trapped. And at the same time, he really doesn't want to go h6 or f6, giving room for the bishop, because then after knight g6, first I will get the bishop pair, second, his pawn structure is going to be ruined, and even worse, I can in some lines take on e4 as well and further damage his pawn structure. So in this position, my opponent starts making a couple of inaccuracies. He takes on e5 and then takes on d2. What he could have done better was to play h6. By the way, this is not a bad move. This is actually a good move. So he could have gone with h6. And actually, the best I have is to go g5. Try to create some sort of attack against his king. And it's funny that after knight takes d2, the best move is very instructive. It is king takes d2. It might look so weird, why don't you take with a queen? But the problem is that if I take with a queen, he can go h5 and try to block the king side. But if I take with a king, now h5 is not possible, and now the g file is opening by force, or the h file. And now his king is actually in much more trouble, even though my king is stuck in the middle of the board. I can probably go like king c1, king b1 if necessary at some point. But one move that is bad instead of g5 is to take. If I actually take this bishop on g6, after all of these trades, black is more than fine here. Black's structure looks a little bit weird. Looks like I have a super sound structure against all these pawns. But it's very difficult to attack these weaknesses. I only have a bishop. I can't attack e6 because of d5. And my pawn in f2 is kind of crippled. I have to go f3 or f4 right now. Otherwise, black might start putting a lot of pressure down the f file, and I might be even in trouble here. So even though the pawn structure looks a little bit weird for black, black is more than fine here. And I don't have enough to show for the better structure. So after h4, my opponent wasn't willing to give away that bad structure, and he started trading these pieces. And that slowly starts giving me a better position. First of all, the pawn on e5 is very good now. After any f6 idea, I can always take, and then have some sort of weak dark squares to exploit with my bishop. And with giving away his dark squared bishop, now this bishop gains more power, as we see further in the game. So he played f6. Of course, he needs to give some room for the bishop, otherwise the bishop would have gotten trapped with h5 and f3. And here I start making a couple of inaccuracies. Again, I play h5 and then h6, which I feel like it's very normal, but computer likes taking a little bit more with long castling. And the point is, my opponent can't go e5 because they lose both pawns in the center of the board. And if they go bishop f7, try to prepare e5, now I start my pawn storm with g5 and then h5. Now g6 is a huge threat. For instance, if e5, which looks like a very powerful move, I have a nice move g6. And again, the game can continue in a route that might lead to a much better endgame for me. He will take my bishop, I will take the bishop, I will throw in h6 and then take on d5, and we'll get a position like this, which this endgame is completely winning for white because these pieces are completely out of the game, and whenever he moves the knight, I can bring my rook to d7, and combined with this bishop and the pawn on h6, black is in deep trouble. But again, like seeing this in a real game as a human, I think it's not so easy to evaluate such endgames from distance. So I'm pretty happy actually with my decision to go with h5. And the other reason is that the best move for black is again a little bit difficult to see, and we both missed it. The best move is actually to go bishop e4. Looks like the bishop is trapped on e4, but he actually has bishop takes f3, sacrificing the bishop temporarily, and now claiming that with the rook on f8, he's going to win the bishop back. And he will. But then after long castle and h6 coming, white has more than enough compensation for the pawn, and black is still in a little bit of trouble with his king. So he went bishop e8. I played h6. Again, like computer likes takes and long castle, but with the same ideas. But I think what I did was still fine. And again, like g6 is a slight inaccuracy from my opponent. Like we're both making inaccuracies here. Computer likes g5. I saw that, what I thought after f5, which is a suicidal move, with rook g1 and all this pressure down the g-file, I'm completely winning, which was right. But he also has bishop g6, allowing me to take, and then after long castle, again, like, in the game I thought f4 is coming anyways, and his king is going to be blasted wide open, and that's exactly what he thought as well. We talked a little bit in the analysis. He was also worried of f4. Like, again, computer finds ways probably to hold for black, but I think from humans' perspective, when with f4 coming, rook df1, even f5, I don't think it's that easy for black to survive this position. My opponent didn't want to give me that much. He didn't want to hook on g5, which can be exploited with f4, so he played g6. I long castled, and again, like, it looks like I'm sacking a pawn, so if takes rook f2, my opponent can win a pawn. But I saw that after rook df1, takes, he's just in so much trouble on these dark squares. Like bishop g7 is coming, for instance, with rook f8 ideas, and the other pieces are just too far away. Like, let's say another line I saw was after knight d7, something like queen c3. I have like so much pressure on the g7 square already, and against a move like queen e7, I can always like take this pawn and even drop back to d6 in some lines. Like, it's so clear that I have enough compensation in this position. So like usually I'm hesitant to sacrifice pawns like that, but this was just so clear with the strong bishop on e5, the rook on the open f file, the queen coming to c3. There are just way too many tactics for my opponent to deal with. He decides not to go for it, correctly so, but he plays the move c6. Which I didn't understand during the game. Of course, he was kind of worried of me playing maybe c4 or e4 and trying to exploit this pin. But I think c6 is a little bit premature. It's better to bring the knight first and then try to get more defenses for the king. But yeah, c6 is still a fine move. I take, and here I make a slight mistake. I play g5, which loses a lot of advantage for me. I think this is my most major inaccuracy of the whole game. What I should have done was to go bishop d6, attacking this rook on f8. After rook f7, I didn't see much, but after f4, I usually drop this bishop back to a3. And the point is, without committing to g5, I can always go with f5 and just instantly blast open his king. With these rooks appearing on the f and g files, this can be absolutely crushing. In fact, this is already like +3. So after b5, I can already go f5 and just blast the position open, and this bishop is very strong. Looks like out of the game, but with the f-file opening, it can always like really contribute to the position. Like, let's say takes, rook df1. If I can trade these rooks, this bishop all of a sudden is going to be a monster. So I played g5. I'm still having a lot of advantage. Queen e7, queen c3. So now I'm threatening some queen g7 ideas. For instance, if knight d7, I will win an exchange with bishop d6. He can't take because of checkmate. So he plays rook f7, getting out of that idea, and also overprotecting the g7 square. I play bishop e5. Of course, he really doesn't want to take because, again, the rook is going to come here. For instance, again, I want to show some tactics. Like, if he goes for this, then bishop d6. Again, he can't take this because of checkmate, and if he moves the queen away, the rook, he's going to deliver checkmate on f8. So he plays knight d7. I go f4. Now I completely bolster the bishop on e5. He takes it, and now I knew that this position is much better for me. So first, I have much more space. I have this strong pawn on h6, and I have all sorts of these tactical threats. My king is 100% safe, and I also have a good bishop versus bad bishop. So I was like, even if this is holdable, I have more than enough to actually play for the win here. So my opponent here makes a big mistake, in my opinion. He plays the move bishop d7. And the move that he misses is this move queen to c7. So first things first, I can't take the pawn on e6 because after bishop d7, my queen is more or less trapped. I only have the e5 square. So let me show that actually. So if I take bishop d7, queen e5, takes. Now after rook f2, all of a sudden, he's getting all sorts of activities, and I'm even worse here. I'm going to start losing some pawns. So I probably won't take the pawn on e6 if he goes queen c7. I will drop the queen back. But then after c5, rook hf1. White is still better, of course. Like, I have this weakness to play for, and also like the strong pawn on h6. But black is still fighting. Black is gaining some sort of activity, and black has some sort of counterplay. Another move that I was a little bit worried of, but I saw that it's not that dangerous, was the move rook to f5, because he can actually go for e5 and try to blast open the position. But I saw that after bishop g4, attacking the rook, rook goes back to f7, I can take. Now, I was worried that he might somehow trade off these bishops, like trade off that bad bishop with my good bishop, and then he starts like ramping up on the e5 pawn and tries to win it back. But I saw that after takes e4, I can make this trade and also like start protecting my pawn with the rook on e1. So I was sure that this position is going to be winning for me. Correctly so. He played bishop d7. I played bishop d3, stopping rook f5 now. And here he had to admit his mistake and go back bishop e8. And then try to, again, trade the queens with queen c7. But of course, it's a very tough thing to do. You just played bishop d7. You don't want to go back bishop e8. And he played rook to e8. And that is indeed a huge and losing blunder in this position. You guys can pause the video and try to find white's winning idea. So here I played a very, very slow move, rook to h2. Looks like it doesn't do much. But the problem is now my idea is to go rook dh1. And now bishop takes g6. So let's say black now tries to trade the queens with the same idea. Bishop c8, rook dh1, and then queen c7. Now I can have bishop takes g6. First, if he takes my queen, I have the intermezzo to win the exchange. If he takes the pawn, now h7 is very strong now, with the rooks doubled on the h-file. So this was something that my opponent couldn't stop. Like, there's literally no two moves that black can make that stops this idea. So this is basically a pre-move for me. Like, whatever he does, I'm going to go rook dh1 and bishop takes g6, and I really don't see how they can really stop it. So my opponent, after a long think, decided to sacrifice the exchange with rook f5. And that's literally the best they can do. So I take the exchange, and now I'm just up an exchange in an endgame. The rest is just a matter of technique. I'm just going to show a little bit of some variations in some lines, but I don't think there are a lot of inaccuracies, of course, like advantage dropping from like +4 to +3, which I don't think discussing it is useful here. I go rook e2, defend my pawn. I slowly start gaining space, and I improve the position of the rook, start creating some sort of other weakness, trying to like blast open the position for my rooks. Just like briefly explaining what I was thinking. So now I have an open file. I play rook d4. This is one moment I want to explain. So playing rook d4, I had to be sure that if they take, they can't create some sort of fortress. So I was initially a little bit worried that they're just going to wait for the bishop here and with a king on d6. And I was like, wait a minute, how can I infiltrate with my rook? But then I realized I can always go c4. They can't take with a b pawn because then I will go b5 and then the rook gets in from the back rank. If my rook gets to the back rank, it's an easy win all the time. So bc5, b5 is not working, and if he takes the d pawn, I can always play d5 at the right moment, and taking, of course, again loses because the rook easily gets to h8 and collects the h7 pawn. So once I made sure that I have more than enough to break the fortress, I played rook d4, kicked the rook from e4, and now I activate the second rook. First of all, of course, I defend my pawn on e3, and then the rook goes to c5, the other rook goes to c3. And again, like, if bishop goes back, now rook c7 is going to come, pawn on h7 is going to be vulnerable. He goes rook d6, king d3. I want to march my king forward now, and now after rook d6, I finish the game with a clear blow. Again, you can pause the video and try to find it. Yes, the pawn endgame is completely winning. I sacrificed the exchange back, and you get this pawn endgame where my king is just marching towards the pawn on h7. So now if king d6, I have this very important reserve tempi with c3. The king goes this way, I go after these pawns, and if the king goes that way, I will go after these pawns. Or even better, I can just slowly start collecting on d5 and try to create a pass pawn with e4. So my opponent decides to go a5 and tries to create some sort of thing on that side of the board, but I go a6, win this pawn, and now I go e4. So now this king is so far away, and I'm creating a pass pawn on this side of the board. So he takes, I take back, king b5, here I go f5, takes, and here I was even like more precise. I could take on f5 and possibly get some sort of like pawn versus like the king on c2 and the pawn on b2. And I was like, that's going to take so long to convert. Of course, with the b pawn, it's winning, but I was able to king d3, more stylish, more classy. Don't let any pass pawns. He tries pushing this one, but this one is well under control. I promoted to a queen. He didn't resign. He played till checkmate. I slowly win the pawns, bring my king, and the rest is pretty simple. I play queen d6, g5, and queen e7 checkmate. So a pretty comfortable win in the first round. And this round was, funnily enough, a round of upsets. So I was the 6th seed of the tournament. And it's insane that 4 out of top 5 seeds of the tournament got upset. 3 of them lost and 1 of them drew, including a grandmaster and like 2 international masters. 2 grandmasters and 2 international masters who were higher than me. They actually lost points against like 1900, 2000 level Canadian rating players, which was insane. So being the 6th seed coming into this tournament, I would have played on board 2 in round 2, which I will cover in another video. So yeah, I won this game. Let me insert the result to end it. So the result is actually 1-0. So pretty comfortable win. I think one thing that was key was the right opening choice. I played the London system, which I usually don't play. And the main reason of doing that was I just wanted a fight which is non-theoretical. I wanted to keep the pieces on the board, and I wanted to put more pressure on him from the get-go. And I didn't want him to play a long theoretical line, which possibly leads to an endgame. So yeah, pretty comfortable win. And I will be back, I think maybe tomorrow or the next day, with the round 2 recap, which I'm just going to spoil a little bit. It is an absolutely scary game for me. So stay tuned. It's an interesting game coming up. And see you guys soon. Have a great one, and goodbye.